Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Delighted to be discussing Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. What we are doing today is so we have a 4-part program. So we're going to be starting with discussing rule 2 today. Imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. The format, first, everybody gets to share what they got from the chapter so far. Now that is open only to people who have read the chapter, of course. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share. In the middle, we've got a nice presentation with graphics from Victor on the chapter. So that's the first stage. The second stage, we're going to do breakout rooms for 25 minutes. We'll have 2 questions. And there'll be moderators in the breakout rooms, and they'll be guiding the discussion as per our standard rules of keeping on topic, being brief, speaking your mind, and being courteous. After the breakout rooms, we'll come back into this main room, and we get to share our takeaways. What did we learn from these conversations? If you want, you can put a question on the table. After that, we're going to do the 4th stage, which is going to be lightning round, where we will take a question and you can give answers to it within 1 to 3 sentences. All right. So that's the plan. And let's get started. First up is going to be Claire. Claire, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. Hello, everyone. So we'll kick off today with some questions, starting with, who are you? And how do you know who you are? Who could you be? And how do you know who you could be? There's certainly something within all of us that is still becoming, that feels unrealized, that is some sort of untapped potential, something that we imagine ourselves that we would like to be, and it makes us sort of eternally dissatisfied. At least I know it does for me. And we know that potential to be true. And what Peterson is really laying out in this chapter is that this is a potential that we capture in our stories, and that we know these stories to be sort of greater than ourselves. He says that we are dormant adventurers and lovers and leaders, artists and rebels, but we need to discover that we are all of these things by seeing the reflection of such patterns in this dramatic and in these literary forms and in these stories. These stories kind of historically have become these meta narratives that tell us who we should be as individuals and what we should value and what we should aim at. And what Peterson is really encouraging us to do in this chapter is to think of what is that personal story of the ideal development of our personality as individuals. So opening, this up here to that question of, what is your story? What is my story? What is our individual story? And Peterson encourages us to write that, to think that out. What is your unique dragon? What is your unique issue that you are hiding away? And pay attention above all else to everything that is sort of monstrous and malicious, and speak wisely, Peterson says, and truthfully, and bring that to the forefront. Peterson says, if you have the vision and the courage, you can chase away even the worst of snakes. And he's encouraging us to kind of do that for ourselves and identify who those snakes are for ourselves. That which you most need, he says, will be found where you least wish to look. So as we start to think about those stories ourselves, start with the thing that you've been avoiding the most. Who dares wins, he says. So who could you be? What is your story? What is your dragon? Who is your Ginny? Who is your anima? And what are you hiding in the fog? And can we start to really name ourselves as the hero and the central character in our own story. So to end, I'll just read the last passage of this chapter. With will and luck, you will find a story that is meaningful and productive, improves itself with time, and perhaps even provides you with more than a few moments of satisfaction and joy. With will and luck, you will be the hero of that story, the disciplined sojourner, the creative transformer, and the benefactor of your family and broader society. Imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Next up is Joe, followed by David R. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, that was beautifully put, Claire. And I'm just going to build on that. He provides a really interesting example of, receiving a letter, and the letter is as a container of information, and that we have a decision to make. Are we going to open this letter and face what is in it, or are we going to basically disregard it and create a great deal of anxiety for us? And it's a metaphor for saying, how are you going to engage with your dragons? Because there are consequences no matter what your decisions are. And that's a really important point, because it kind of builds on the entire chapter itself. But the most interesting part of this, and I actually just really didn't think about it until prior to when we were just having a brief discussion, was this roadmap for understanding our own behavior that he kind of provides us in the second at the end of the chapter itself, where he talks about the idea of mimicking and imitation and drama, and how these things kind of come together in order for us to how we identify patterns and understand ourselves. So something mimicking is just mindless, it's just an action for an action, right? But an imitation is something a little bit different. It has a higher degree of flattery, and it's actually identifying patterns in behaviors that you're then imitating. But the interesting aspect of this is when it becomes drama and stories. Because when they become drama and stories, they become an ideal self, like a formalized thing on the stage, essentially, that we start to identify. And from this, we can even derive our heroes. And it's an interesting progression that he provides us with he even mentions how that the written word, these stories, once they become written, they become ritualistic and they become religions. And some of these are the basis of religions, and this is how sometimes heroes are even, identified within religions themselves. They become gods. So those are, just some brief takeaways that I had, and I'll leave it there for now.
Well, thank you, Joe. Folks, please go ahead and type an exclamation mark to line up to talk about what did you get. You get 2 minutes, and you can talk about what is it that you get. What is it that you got from this chapter? What's the most important insight that you got? You're not trying to summarize the chapter. You're trying to say, okay, what did you get? David R., you're next.
So two things kind of struck me as I was reading the chapter that has caused me to ponder or think about this week, and to see how it relates to some other things that I'm doing. Is the first one was there is something profound to be said for the concept of learning as remembering. And then the second thing that struck me was, you do not choose what interests you, it chooses you. And I've been pondering and thinking about those 2 points. In addition, the chapter itself is fantastic, and I think it's extremely well written, and I can find it to be tremendously relevant to myself. But those 2 things, kind of caused me to pause and actually contemplate them during the week.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Maritza. Maritza, go ahead.
Hi. So I think my readings of the last couple of weeks are kind of causing me to question a whole lot about what I thought I knew about myself. What struck me about this chapter is just a simple question: how do you know who you are? Like, it's could you be wrong? Like, we don't generally, or maybe for myself, I don't generally go around asking myself who I am. I don't ask anyone else who I am. You know, it's kind of something that sits in the back of our head. But when it's pointed out to us, you know, it's the question of, you know, it made me think of something I'd recently read in Lewis Sullivan's Kindergarten Chats about finding our shelves a canned good that's sitting on a shelf and not being used. That's what you've become, because you've allowed yourself and your ideas to stagnate. So that was such a powerful image that it actually, this just simple question, how do you know who you are, came back to me. And in addition to that uncertainty that it caused to arise within me, it also brought up he illuminated the idea that only after you have an encounter, a personal encounter with who you actually are, can you commit solely and or thoroughly to the right pursuit, or to that more meaningful pursuit. So even if you thought you knew who you were, you have to kind of have an internal chat with yourself. You gotta put yourself on the chopping block there and figure out, who are you really, not idealistically. And then, because it's gonna be painful, we're not gonna maybe like the answer, but the only way to move forward is to see where you are. And that idea was so profound to me. It was, and I don't know if in the chat, I don't remember if it was directly in the chapter. I think it was in one of the videos, but a corollary that I heard was with, it's actually a biblical reference to the conversion of Saul to Paul. For those of you who aren't very religious, it's this like total philandering, and it's this guy is down wrong path. He's all about everything materialistic. He's a braggart, everything not good. And he has a conversion. And the fascinating thing about the conversion, I'm just going to say, you know, I'm skipping over it as the non-Catholic here. The fascinating thing to me is that he's beating his chest about all these things he is. And then at the end he says, but it's not that I am all these things, it's that I'm hoping to be some of these, like, not that I have already attained all this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on and take hold for that which, you know, it would be my Savior took hold of me. If you put yourself as your Savior and take hold of yourself, gosh, imagine who you could be.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is going to be Jyoti, Judith, Becky, Shelley, and Jade. Jyoti, go ahead.
Yeah, this was a very long chapter. But what I got from it was that we are all born with a certain potential. And in our lifetime, most of the people can realize their potential if they find it, what it is. And he gave a good example of Socrates, like David said, and it rang a bell with me because he said that you learn, remembering is learning, that the child is born with previous experiences, and the new experiences help him to recapture his previous experiences. And I'll say very shortly, because we can talk about it in the breakout room. In Hindu Vedic language, there's something called sanskara. Children are born with their previous sanskara, and how the whole environment, community, and family brings out those sanskaras helps the child to become more knowledgeable and learn expertly. So that kind of rang a bell with me. Then the whole process of birthing and rebirthing and how you can wash your previous perceptions and start all over again is again, there's a lot to be written here, has been written about it. I was taken by that, and that is very, very true. So I'm going to just end here because I went to town with it. You see, I have made a big thing, but already I'm not going to repeat what Joe, Clara, and David has already mentioned because that's like redundant. But those things have been very, very impactful throughout the chapters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do one more, and then we will go ahead and do Victor's presentation, and then we'll continue on. So it's going to be Judith, Victor, Becky, Shelley, Jade, and Mike. Judith, go ahead.
I also enjoyed the learning is remembering line. That struck me. I want to think more about it. I remember when my son was about 8 or 9 years old and he learned some things and he insisted that, no, this wasn't taught to me. I've always known this. This has been within me. Kind of like, it sounded like that, and I never forgot. And of course I dismissed him immediately as a child, but anyway, I really like the idea. And I also like the alchemical woodcut, and it fascinated me that there was so much in it. And even I understand, Jordan Peterson is doing his own interpretation. So even if we were to say, oh, maybe something could have been interpreted differently because he didn't make it, it just had so much in it that you couldn't deny that there was a lot of thought and lots that was trying to be communicated in that. So I enjoyed that very much. Okay, now, just full disclosure here, okay? My daughter gave me something. It says, specifically gave to me, it says, she found few things more tedious than having to play by the rules. So just putting my biases out there, you can do with whatever you want with the rest of what I'm gonna say. So this rule breaking thing came up last time too, and I'm not disagreeing with Jordan Peterson. I just feel like there's something.
Judith, let's do one thing. These things will keep for the takeaways. Right now,
Okay.
we're just saying, what is the one thing that you get from this chapter that you
All right.
found valuable?
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is going to be Victor, then followed by Becky, Shelley, Jade, and Mike. Folks, you can line up for more for putting your takeaways by just typing in exclamation mark. Victor.
All right, so give me a second. Can you see my?
Yes, you need to speak into the mic, so you're a little bit louder.
Oh, sorry about that. So can you see my presentation there?
No, I can see only the computer screen.
All right, okay. All right, now you probably
Yes.
should. All right then. So tonight's rule is imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. And this chapter has a particular artwork. This is done by an amazing artist. And Claire actually opened very beautifully how to, and she summarized, who are you, who could you be, and how to act. So these are the central themes of this chapter. And as we looked last time, we are a complex being. We are a set of subpersonalities. We have different facets, different angles to our own behavior. And sometimes, and most of the times, it looks like we understand ourselves, and also we don't understand ourselves. So we always struggle with this idea of identity and where we are and where we are going. And also, we know one more thing about us. It's that we have more to offer. We have more potential. We can do more things, and we can be more. But in reality, although we aspire for that, in reality, we are kind of constricted by either health, poor health, okay health, or any kind of misfortune, or economically, or financially, or in any circumstances. You are in the wrong place and wrong time. and general tragedies and usual mishaps of life. So these are the things that tend to restrict us to go for the best. But at the same time, there are another set of things that actually restrict our potential, like lack of discipline, lack of faith, lack of looking forward and believing in something, lack of imagination, lack of commitment. So these are the things that actually restrict us. We always have these dreams or these hopes, and lack of these actually inhibit us. And how to get to that, how to look for these problems. So for that, Peterson actually gives an example of human behavior and animal behavior. We do in science and in observation, when we go out, if we want to find a pattern of an animal or a plant, we go out and we observe it over a span of time, and then draw some conclusions. And then we see the patterns. And similarly, we have such kind of information for human behavior. And we have such kind of information that has been put into words, actions, drama, literature, and even mythical stories. So these are done by shamans, prophets, mystics, artists, poets, bards. So these are the ones, they look at human behavior, put in the human behavior into story, and then convey what we behave or how we behave like. And the best of the stories, they are the ones that are remembered. Those are not forgotten. Those are the ones that are given to generation after generation. And then we remember them and we get the distilled information out of them. So this is one way of finding out how humans behave, and we can reflect it upon ourselves and say, okay, this probably is how I would be behaving, and what are the qualities that we want to derive from those stories. So that's the idea. And in the book, to make this point, Peterson discusses this particular artwork. Let's look at that artwork. He looks, so I was looking for a similar kind of alchemical artworks, and I found these very similar artworks. They all have the basic or the core elements of what Peterson is talking about. And diving into it, this picture, and this is an artwork by an alchemist. And Peterson mentions it. So the artist himself or herself, they are dreaming in the very real sense to capture the essence of what the whole idea of a story, or what there is, what's out there, what's inside of us. So if we observe carefully, it looks like an egg-shaped container. And at the bottom, we see this winged spear. There is a spear and there are wings to it. And we'll come back to it and discuss. And on top of it, there is a dragon. And on top of it, we see this human figure with two heads, one male and one female. And on top of it, we see the sun and the moon. And the sun is on the side of the male, and moon is on the side of the female. And on top of it, we see the symbol of Mercury that sits on the top of the figure. And on the sphere, if you see, you see number 3 and 4. And sometimes they are represented in image form, which are triangle and rectangle. They both have their own significance. We'll come to that. What is this? Alchemists, they see it as materia prima. It's the primordial fundamental substance that everything is contained. It's the matter and the spirit. and everything is in an egg-like shape. And Peterson gives this example that an egg, before it is hatched, it is an amalgamation of everything. And only after hatching, we see the actual form. And this is what alchemist is getting at. And this actually represents the whole potential that exists for us. It's around chaos. And it's a container of the world and the psyche. We can see it in both ways. The world that exists outside and the world that exists inside, even in our psyche. And this is the world before it has been differentiated. Before we see any kind of interest, if something is something captures our interest, before the interest gets to it, it's all one thing. And once the interest falls on it, let's say I have an interest to design a pen. And now I keep thinking like, okay, how can I make a pen better? And what are its functions? And how can I improve it? So once the interest strikes, I keep thinking about it. And that is the interest compels us towards that particular interest. This is where the old and the new, they come into contact. This is where the new makes an entrance into the familiar. And the thing with the interest is it's ephemeral. It moves around, and we have to chase it enough so that the imagination and attention actually captures it in a meaningful manner. And Peterson mentions this particular idea is represented in our modern literature and the movies Harry Potter. And in Harry Potter, there is a game called Quidditch. And the game actually has, the idea of the game, it kind of looks like a soccer game where you have a ball and you'll have to put the ball in a hoop and you'll get some points. But it's not just one ball, it's two things. So the one on the left, it's the usual game. And the one on the right, it's called a snitch. And the game is played by seven players on a team. And the one on the right, it has its own importance. Because if you chase it, and if you can get a hold of it, you will get 150 points, which pretty much guarantees you can win the game. So here, Peterson makes a very good distinction between these two. When we are playing a game, in this particular game, there are two games. There is a game and there is a game within the game. And the left ball represents the game that we play with our teammates. So in real life, the game that we play in social life, that we need the other people and the cultural game that we play. And at the same time, the right ball, which is snitch, represents your own individual game, and it has its own value. The whole game represents you will have to play the game with the society or with the culture, and at the same time, you will have to have your own individual game. And incidentally or coincidentally, the snitch actually represents this round sphere, the winged spear that we see. And this is the round chaos that represents the interest that moves around, and it's elusive, it's not easy to find it, but with right kind of virtues, right kind of dedication, right kind of interest, right kind of discipline, when you get it, you will be more happy and you'll be more satisfied with your own game. And as Joe was pointing out, the idea of story and how the information is conveyed over in a different form. First in the form of action, imitation. And when it comes to imitation, so we get information in different ways. We imitate and we imitate. By imitate, it's not mimicking. Peterson gives a particular example about a mom and her daughter. When the daughter plays the game of mom, she's not mimicking the person, she imitates the person. She imitates, and she takes the best of the qualities and then she imitates. And the next form of information that we get is verbal communication, and then it's play, and then it's drama. So verbal communication and play, and the drama actually captures the imitation and the verbal communication and the play in a formalized way. And then it gets into literature. And in literature, we all know when we read non-fiction, especially fiction, we know that the character doesn't exist in real life, but we still read and we get all the emotions out of it, even though we know that it doesn't exist. So that's a great way of communicating any kind of human behavior. So most of the greatest of the stories have this particular quality, the quality of the hero, especially. Hero, he or she takes a dire situation and makes it better. And if the situation is too chaotic, bring order to the situation. Or if it's too restricted, throw it into chaos and bring a new kind of order to it. So that's the kind of story that all these shamans and prophets and mystics, artists, poets, and bards, they all are conveying this kind of human behavior to us. And this is a story that we need to take as an example. And then how to reflect it in our own life with this one. Everyone requires a story or a structure for their, so to structure their actions, where they are and where they are going. So that gives a good direction. And how to do this. Aim at something profound, noble, and lofty. So these are Peterson's points. Pick the best target that you can conceptualize and stumble towards it. Start at a place that is not so good, and then end at a place that is better. Notice errors, misconceptions along the way, face them, correct them. This is the way you can zigzag towards it. You are on a journey, and if you are on a journey, the map better be accurate. And from the first rule, we know that we have to respect the old, and we also have to respect the new. And before even we think of breaking any rules, we actually have to master the rules, and only then we have to think about breaking them. This is rule number 2. Imagine who you could be, and end single-mindedly at that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. Great as always. Thanks. Next up is going to be Becky, Shelley, Jade, Mike, and Nick. Becky. Oh, just a second. Let me make sure. Is there a problem? Go ahead, Becky.
Okay. So who are you? You grow up learning who you are relative to your family. You are taught how to act to fit into society, and how well you follow the rules of society informs you where you are on some hierarchy. But still the question remains, who are you? At this moment, you are who others tell you you are, but how do you see yourself and the ideal version of yourself? This directs you to who you can be, and the only way to find yourself and to become more is to die to what you are. And in death, there's transformation. And from death, you have rebirth into what you could be, something better.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Next up is Shelley, Jade, and Mike. Shelley?
Hey, thank you. First, I want to say, Victor, I really appreciated you having those visuals in your presentation because I was having a hard time visualizing it and I didn't have time to look it up on the internet. So that was very valuable. Thank you so much. I loved that and I loved your explanation. I'm going to read a very, very short paragraph. We'll take like 1 minute. The reason I'm reading it, it's on page 86 at the end of the chapter. And I feel like this paragraph really summarizes what the entire chapter is about. And also it explains exactly how I've been trying to live my life. Aim at something. Pick the best target you can currently conceptualize. Stumble toward it. Notice your errors and misconceptions along the way. Face them and correct them. Get your story straight. Past, present, future, they all matter. You need to map your path. You need to know where you were so that you do not repeat the mistakes of the past. You need to know where you are, or you will not be able to draw a line from your starting point to your destination. You need to know where you are going, or you will drown in uncertainty, unpredictability, and chaos, and you'll starve for hope and inspiration. For better or worse, you're on a journey. You have an adventure, and your map better be accurate. Voluntarily confront what stands in your way. The way, that is the path of life, the meaningful path of life, the straight and narrow path that constitutes the very border between order and chaos, and the traversing of which brings them into balance. I just think that beautifully summarizes the chapter, and that summarizes at the end of your life, if you look back on that, you have lived a life well. Thank you.
Wow. Shelley, that was magnificent. He does that in chapters. I mean, this is one thing I like about the structure of his books. Even in the first book, he did the same thing where at the end, he brings everything together with this kind of poetic force, as well as hitting all the core concepts at once. So thank you. Next up is going to be Jade, Mike, and Nick. Jade.
So a lot has been said about the chapter. The thing that stuck out to me were the things that I didn't hear. I know that this may be a weird take, but I was noticing, like, for instance, I guess I don't want to say they're assumptions, but like, for instance, with the bills, there are people who are unbothered by unopened bills. Like, they basically know what they're going to say and they just don't want to deal with it, and they don't care. You know, it's I don't know if I'll call it a skill set, but there is something to it. Not being unbothered with things being mounting. So that's something to consider. There's also the fact that avoidance is a strategy. That part really isn't in there. It's basically like, take everything head on. I don't know, sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good to go around, or to, like, you know, take the route, you know, to avoid the danger, avoid the dragon sometimes. Sometimes it's good, you hit them head on. I'm also hearing, I don't know, this one might not be because I read the chapter very quickly, but I'm also feeling like the assumptions that he's writing with tends to appear to make me feel as though he's assuming that everyone who's reading the book hasn't learned the rules yet. Because they're all cautioning you not to break them, because kind of you don't know them. So it's like, so even just maybe further down in the book, he helps people assess, like, when are you equipped to start breaking these rules and start shaking things up? And that kind of has me thinking, because like, again, this is all about plan. Know what you're doing, have a direction, da, da, da. But if you know the rules, you don't need to do that. You can have a spontaneous adventure as opposed to a planned adventure is what I'm hearing. So it's like, I don't know. And then in a sense, I'm also hearing you don't know what you can be. Set an objective and you'll get there. But I feel like sometimes when you set that objective and you try to follow it, it's good. It's good to set an objective, but the concept of being able to redirect that objective, because sometimes we're just busy trying to fix those mistakes so that we can still hit that the preliminary objective, and the objective needs to change, because unfortunately, as you travel through life and time, things change. Just like right now, we're seeing that. Like we could have had an objective, but the terrain itself has changed. So that objective might be obsolete, but you're still going for it because you know what? You have that tunnel vision. So the concept of even spontaneity for people who don't know the rules, but I guess that's a rule, is understanding that the terrain might change and what to do when the terrain changes. So I appreciate what he wrote. Those things stuck out at me like, So yeah, this is my 2 cents. Done.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jade. I really appreciate that, because it's like, it's a question of dog that did not bark. So it's a question of, whenever you're reading something, so what is it that it's missing? What is it that's not being said? So it's wonderful that you bring in that perspective. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, Nick, and Jean. Mike.
Okay. What I got out of this is a concept that anything you can possibly imagine is real. Anything you can possibly imagine is real. Pablo Picasso said that. And Henry Ford said that. And he was able to build a car which sold for $400 and was affordable, the Model A. Any color, as long as it was black. Paul Dirac said that and invented an operator to use on Schrodinger's wave equation that yielded a positron, antimatter, and extended quantum reality to a new level. Rhonda Byrne said that and invented the secret, the law of attraction, and her own publishing career. Facing your errors and correcting them is the so-called objective function that we've been talking about in the OODA loop. And I'll yield the balance of my time once again.
Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Nick, followed by Jean. Nick.
Yep, so I had 3 main takeaways, and some of these were kind of hit on by others, so I'll try to be kind of brief in some of them. But as David first said, that whole learning is remembering, that really struck to me, and it struck home to me, and just really begs to question, like, how many of us have all this, untapped potential where we might just not be able to discover what we're truly best at. And just, that's part of I think the idea of just people in the growth mindset and kind of constantly learning, constantly kind of striving for for self-improvement. I think that's one of the key ways to discover what that potential is and what you're most capable of. And I kind of in that whole along with that thought as well, the whole there's some things that they don't really need to be taught, and that we kind of just have kind of in our genetics, so to speak. And how I kind of have felt this way in my past too, and I kind of always called it wiring, where there are some things that can be taught, but then but that's not all there is to learn. And I think some of that stuff has to do with that kind of wiring, that learning as remembering, where it's really inside of us. And then the second thing was just that whole fighting dragons and snakes voluntarily. And there's a lot of good information in the footnotes, and one of the things he had called out was how that when we voluntarily surrender kind of to whatever we're fighting, that actually shows a reduced stress response in the body, both a bodily response and emotionally. So we're going to have to all fight our dragons, so you're better off going after the dragon and fighting it rather than it coming and finding you. And then lastly, I thought it was really interesting, just the history and all the time you spend the Mesopotamian religious stories and just that old images and just the whole idea that we all have this kind of primordial potential within all of us that can really manifest in so many different ways. And you can really just see that evolution, how that idea carried really into Christianity and then Western civilization, just how profound that idea was. And it as part of those stories, you really show it just by the pictures and everything, it really shows the value that they had on the individual transformation in the context of the societal structure instability. And too often we see, I think, others wanting to fight others' fight someone's dragon for them. And this is something I'd actually be curious, maybe when we're in the discussion groups, for others' thoughts on, like, why is that not the right thing to do? Why can we not be fighting someone else's dragon? And then just to end it with a quote that I just really like too is that the soul willing to transform as deeply as necessary is the most effective enemy of the demonic serpents of ideology and totalitarianism in their social or personal and social forms.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. Next up is going to be Jean, followed by Roger. Jean.
Yeah, I found this chapter is quite interesting because I think self-development is also something we are interested, especially fulfill our potential we discussed the other day. I found the most interesting thing is they mentioned about exposure to new experience activate this dormant potential. So as our remembering of our previous already have the knowledge, I understand, actually help me to understand why I really always need to go out to have new adventures. I just have to do it. I have all these ideas about, like, I want to have an RV and I drive around, and on the weekend I explore all the mountains around, but my husband is not into it. So we didn't buy the RV yet, but I finally planned the RV trip this summer in Alaska. So it's just like, and when I travel, it's funny, when I travel, I can think so much about the past as well as the future. It's interesting. I was writing a story of on my trip, I was able to write a whole story of something happened in my life. And very fast, one night, I read the whole thing. And I was thinking about it, just not to forget the memory. I just found, and I remember my grandma too. It's like, it's so interesting on the trip because you don't really distracted by all the trivial things around you. And you don't have to do with it. And you were able to think about future and the past, everything come together. And the new experience, really, when I was scuba diving, I was like, why I didn't do it earlier? I was like, I feel at home. I feel this experience very familiar. It's like there's some of your experience, you feel you're totally with it. Sometimes even when you talk with someone, you're totally in sync. You are like totally immersed in that. That experience is not always happens. But that moment is that experience. So I think that explains why it is. It is.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Next up is Roger. Roger.
All right. Yeah, I actually really like this chapter too. Originally, I had presented how maps of meaning links to it, but then I was kind of thinking about all my points, and either we'd have to go into it a lot, or he already covered the basic idea in the book. So, and then Victor covered anything that wasn't covered by that Peterson. So instead, I'm just gonna go through some interesting things. I was really a big fan of, he's done it in his lectures, but he hadn't ever put it in a book. The argument about the abstraction of moral laws in the Ten Commandments. That essentially, because Moses is constantly passing judgment, and he's basically constantly dancing around these rules, but nobody's ever actually said the rules out loud. We've all just already been following them. And, after he spends so much time, judging, the Israelites, he finally, goes to the mountain and has a revelation from God. And it's like, these were the rules we've always been living by. And it's kind of just a perfect example of how humans, our main tendency is first and foremost, we act. And then through great effort, we might be able to articulate and figure out what it is we're actually doing. So that idea was really cool. I also really liked what Victor was kind of covering on the snitch, and how it's a representation of round chaos, and how it's a representation of, you guys came to the other lectures, valence. of when things kind of stick out to you more than anything else, but there's nothing actually specific about that thing outside of to you, it seems more important. And kind of the main principle that the seeker as the person who plays the game that other people play while also pursuing something of primary significance. And I just wanted to kind of add to Victor's whole point, because I found it really interesting that in the Harry Potter story, that snitch, well, one, the fact that Peterson points out it's a Christ narrative, or it's similar to the hero of Christ, where like death and resurrection. In the first one of confronting the basilisk, and Harry dies because of it, but then is reborn. And then at the very, very end of the actual series, Harry has to take on Voldemort, right? The ultimate epitome of Satan. And as he's about to do it, he knows, everything's lost. And earlier he had the snitch in his pocket. He had kissed it. And the hint that comes off on the snitch is, I open at the close. And it's kind of this weird riddle of how to unlock the snitch. As Harry's walking to what he knows is his death, and he can't seem to quite accept that, he grabs the snitch and whispers to it, I'm going to die. And that's the password that opens it up. It allows him to have access to the Deathly Hallows, which is a magical stone that allows him to talk to all his dead ancestors. And through talking to all his dead ancestors, he accepts his death. He accepts the vulnerability, which is exactly what Peterson's talking about, that idea of full surrendering and acceptance of suffering allows him to truly transcend and accept his death. And I thought that's all fits right into exactly the same theory. I thought that was just a really cool layover of the Harry Potter theory. But yeah, those were two main ideas that I really wanted to share.
Thank you, Roger. All right, so now we are on to the next three parts. The first one now is going to be breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are going to be moderated. People with stars in the beginning of the name are the moderators. There are two questions. Who could you be? And second is, which part of this chapter spoke to you most? The rules in the breakout room is, keep on topic, be brief, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. All right. The breakout rooms are going to run for 25 minutes, after which we're going to come back here for the third stage, where we're going to talk about our takeaways after the discussion, after hearing everybody else's take. And then we're going to do for the finale, we're going to do a lightning round. Okay, so I'm starting the breakout rooms now. Joe, go ahead.
So a really brief takeaway that I had was the importance of being careful of who you imitate and understanding, who your role models are and why they're your role models. That was a very, enlightening point, because sometimes we see things that we believe that we want to do or want to be like people we want to be like. And that means our maps are off. That's what everybody kept talking about. Mm-hmm. And so that we see somebody and that's who we strive to be. And that's not really who we are. And I think that is a really important point for me to take away from this entire discussion. The other point was that, and I'm going to try and articulate this because I have not formulated it, so you can either maybe Roger can translate it into English. And so, but the idea of the idea of not only understanding ourselves within, the understanding ourselves within the greater context and the greater scheme of things, like as in the whole, but understanding ourselves individually. And the reason that's important is it comes back to another rule that we talked about earlier, is that when do we break the rules? And that is having like this full understanding of why rules exist in the first place. So when do we then, know to deviate from our perceived path, if that makes sense, or what our perceived map. It probably doesn't. I haven't thought it out completely.
I have a way of putting it as a question, and I'll put it as a lightning round question.
Okay, that's great. I mean, and how do we know our maps are correct?
Okay.
Like, that's the other part. I you know, that's one thing that's kind of, how do you validate your map? I know the seeker in the beginning of the chapter absolutely understands how to know what's to pursue as meaningful and all that, but you know, it still wasn't clear to me as to what exactly how to pursue how you know your map is valid.
Thank you. Next up is Victor, followed by Judith. Victor.
Well, from this chapter, what I took out is the idea of we can actually look into future, and it's not just we can, we should be looking into our future, and we should be designing our future, or else we will be in chaos. That's one thing. And from our discussion group, I took out a couple of things, especially Darlene. She mentioned her past and what she is looking towards, which was really interesting, as she has some plans to look forward and what she wants to do. And Caroline, she mentioned a few things about the idea of giving up on ideology and actually having that change in ourselves. And so that really struck me. And Dave mentioned about impressions and how impressions make an impression on us. Impressionists, especially when they communicate a particular idea, it stays with us. So that idea.
Excellent. Thank you. So for the lightning round, I'm going to keep telling you questions that we're going to do for the lightning round. First question for the lightning round is going to be, what is the relationship between rule 1 and rule 2? Okay, that's the first question. And again, in lightning round, you can give your answer between 1 to 3 sentences. Try to be extremely crisp and extremely brief. You can write it down if you want. Write down your kind of at least bullet points or something like that, whatever words or something that help you to crystallize it. Next up is going to be Judith, Maritza, and Jade. Judith.
Okay, Maritza asked, how do you know who you are? I remember her asking that. Joe just asked, how do you validate your maps? I think that you do it partly by testing. And I think that Jordan Peterson gave us a really excellent prescription for individual and society as a basic prescription. Like, yeah, I'd definitely follow it. But think about how small children, you give them kitchen equipment or tools. What's the first thing they do? They don't just imitate how you use them. They break all the rules of how they're supposed to be used. They do whatever they want with them. And I think that I just think that maybe Jordan Peterson didn't emphasize as much as I would like, or at all maybe, but not that well, whatever, he can speak for himself. But I just didn't feel like there wasn't any emphasis or enough emphasis on the idea that when you're figuring out who you are, when you're figuring out where you want to be, it isn't always just that nice, perfect, ethically understanding the rules and then testing them, because that a lot of us, we spend our lives trying to figure out these rules, or some of them, right? So some things we learn when we break things out of ignorance, or I think some, the frontal cortex develops last. And I once read that that's when young people are, in their 20s and 30s, a lot of creative work happens, and because they're testing, they're doing things that are breaking rules. So that's the little part that I just missed seeing in this good, chapter for how to, find your, aim at something profound. Like, when kids go off to college, do they always know where they want to aim? Profound and noble and lofty. Sometimes they have to do a lot of things, make a lot of mistakes, try a few things, and then they figure out. So you really have to test and make mistakes.
Thank you, Judith. Appreciate that. Next up is Maritza, followed by Jade. Maritza.
Well, I want to say first, what I learned in my breakaway is that I'm even more convinced of the amazing people that show up here at your meetups. Everybody is just so impressive. But I want to say not that I think you should ignore the rules, but two things. Treat your quest for determining who you are either like gardening or like salsa dancing. And here's why. So, or even maybe not gardening, because Peterson does talk about the eternal forest, right? The eternal forest is where you find that terrible unknown, but it's also where you find where you're going to face chaos or you're going to face order. If you're going on a hike and you're going through a forest and you are like me, you want to touch everything, right? You want to touch that plant that looks fuzzy. You might want to put something in your mouth and then you just scroll through. Well, that's awesome, but sometimes it can get you in trouble. If you're very, very allergic to poison ivy, if you just go around blindly touching everything, you're going to be in a world of hurt later. In general, they tell you it's not good to put things in your mouth if you don't know what they are, if you're in the forest. But if you know that one basic rule, I have a vision in my mind of what poison ivy looks like. I know the number of the leaves, I know the color, the shapes, and you keep that one. You're not thinking about it as you're just, skipping through the forest. Yeah, that's not advisable, but that's not actively in your mind, but it is a bit of knowledge that's in your mind. So when you're going through and you're breaking the rule of not touching things, that's still there, even though you're not thinking about it. So as your hand's going out and you're grabbing stuff and playing with things, your hand's gonna reach back almost before your mind has thought about it. It's gonna pull back from that plant that looks like the poison ivy because that bit of knowledge in your mind stopped you. So I believe that is the merging of what Peterson is saying to us with the idea of we stand upon these stories, and rules should never be so rigid so as to impede you from skipping through that scary forest, right? And the second one I'm thinking is, so salsa dancing. I'm going to say a little bit from the perspective of female because I identify as female. You have to know when you start to dance whether you're going to be the one leading or the one following. It doesn't have to always be the same, but when you start that dance, that should be fairly obvious. And if it's not explicitly stated, the implicit clues between the two of you will identify that. This works very well for every other encounter you're going to have in life. A, and B, I used to teach salsa and I used to tell the women, okay, one very important thing, kick back. Always kick your right leg back. Doesn't matter if you mess up, if he messes up, if you almost fall during a spin. As long as you end, when you stop spinning, kick your leg back. And now you've reset, the world is all right, and you keep going. And to me, follow this for your life and we'll be okay.
Wow, thank you, Maritza. That's excellent. Kind of putting it at the mimetic level of actual kind of movement, because that's actually a fundamental level where you can ground such principles. Next up is Jade, followed by Jean. Jade.
So I guess on some level, I'm more raising questions / comments. So there's one thing that I would like to say to follow Maritza, which is in the salsa imagery is like, but when it's two women dancing together, it gets trickier. You don't know who's gonna follow, and that happens a lot at a party. You with your girlfriends, you don't want to dance with the guys because and it's like who's leading, and you got to feel it. You got to feel it. You can't have that power struggle or the dance. It doesn't work. But and you could disagree with me if you want, but I feel like on the level of we could plan, but we can't predict. And I could also be, there are probably infinite versions of me that I could be, but why? Why? What's the point? Which version of me am I going to choose? And how do I know that this version of me makes sense? To a certain extent, yes, especially coming from childhood, it's good. You have a bit of vision, you figure out who you want to be, how you want to be. But I think, again, with that ever-changing terrain, when I just think of within my lifetime, how many different quote unquote paradigms or shifts or like there have been, you kind of have to know what you're going to present forward at that time and what aspect of you is necessary for what's in front of you. And the question is also like, one of the things that we were going back and forth about within the group, primarily because I kept, egging it on a little bit, but it's when is growth enough? Like we're always thinking about who we could be as opposed to evaluating who we are and where's the value in that. One member of the group mentioned that they felt they were the best version of who they are. And to a certain extent, like I'm not even thinking about if I'm the best version of who I am. I am who I need to be at this moment. Will that change tomorrow? It'll change by default. I don't have to change it. So it's a concept to me of whether it's control. It's like how controlling am I going to be over me and my destiny? Am I in a position, have I created enough internal order where I am able to allow, or is anyone in that position where they can allow themselves to cultivate naturally, where they could allow, I gave the example of gardening. Like I am a guerrilla gardener. I will put the stuff out there and I will allow nature to take its course. Like I will tend to it. I'll make sure everything's okay, but like, I'll make sure the worms are in there. I set it up so that it can sustain itself. And, again, grow naturally. So it's a question of people don't allow themselves to do that much anymore. So it's a question of, are we able to determine who we should be, not who we could be? We can be anybody. So I think we should be wondering who should we be, and that's something that I'm coming up with now. Now I'm riffing.
Wonderful.
That's it.
Thanks. Thanks, Jade. Very nice. Who we should be instead of could be. Very good. Next up is Jean, followed by Jyoti. Jean.
Yeah, I really like what Maritza shared about the dancing. Actually, it's interesting. I think dancing actually I found quite interesting because in the rule, man lead. That's traditional rule. I think that's the reason there's so many women like dancing, but not a lot of men, because women naturally love dancing because that's a few sport they can do. But man, there's much more demanding for men to learn dancing because they have to lead. First, they don't enjoy the dance that much, a lot of them, and they have to learn a lot of techniques. So I found when I dance, because I love dance so much, I tend to lead myself, and sometimes some people have a hard time dealing with it. So I think the rule and
sorry, there is a problem with your sound.
Sorry, I found the American, the advantage of American because they have very clear rules. That make our society so structured. We understand where things go. But I also notice, because of that, a lot of people, I think it's important when they follow the rule to understand why the rule is there. Because some rule, they have been there for a long time. People don't even know why. So they blindly follow. I think that's a problem we have to deal with.
Thank you. So what we'll do is that I want to make sure that we have enough time for doing the lightning round. I have just one question down. What is the relationship between rule 1 and rule 2? If you have any questions that you would suggest for the lightning round, you can go ahead and type it in the chat and I'll pick a few of them. Next up is Jyoti. Jyoti, what's your takeaway?
What my takeaway is, I think Jordan Peterson has written some good rules, and he's a wise man. He saw what it takes in life to get to where you want to be. However, if you are not getting satisfaction with your map, and this is, I'm directing this to you, Joe, when you said that how do you know your map is accurate? If along the way you are not finding satisfaction with your course of action, you have to change your map. Because as old as I am, I do realize with all the sufferings that I have had, satisfaction in life is very, very important. That should be your most important goal in life. And if you have done everything the right way, when I say right way, in a balanced way, in a modest way, you are a happy person. I am enjoying my retirement now because I have fought so many battles. And I think I was telling Roger that I'm very complacent and I'm almost feeling guilty about it. And he reassured me. He said, if you're feeling, very content, very complacent, then so be it. You've paid your dues. You've done it. So I think I have no regrets. I did everything in a balanced way. I fought the battles. I fought the losses, the griefs, and everything. I can sit back and enjoy life a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Next up is Kevin. And then we're going to go for questions. Kevin.
Yeah, I'm for between rule 1 and rule 2. On rule 1, he mentioned that each rule was one's creative act is going to bring other rules. That's mean that you create order, maybe break other order. So so we need the balance of chaos and order. And he also mentioned that we must value the past, and also we must keep one eye open for the future. For the rule 2, he uses that X marks the spot. Mentions the bull's eye. For me, it's the center of a cross. Also, it's a choice to fit in a current map or path, or you want to upgrade or change the direction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, so now it's time for lightning round. So we have to try to keep the answers as brief as possible. So the first one is about the relationship between rule 1 and rule 2. Rule 2 says, imagine who you could be, and then aim single-mindedly at that. So it's an individual quest. It's an exhortation for you to do something. The rule 1 says, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievements. What is the relationship between these two? Who would like to, if you would like to say something, go ahead and type exclamation mark. And we can do, just very briefly. Go ahead, Victor. Oh, Victor, you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I just wanted to say it relates to the game in Harry Potter. 2 balls, one is quaffle and the other one is snitch. Quaffle is respect your teammates and the actual game and the individual game. The rule number.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, anybody else? What's the connection between these two? Maritza.
In the first rule, we're told not to denigrate the social structures, but it's also said that they need to be updated by creative people in order to retain their vitality. And I see that in rule 2, it's kind of showing you the manner in which you yourself would become one of those creative people.
Wonderful. Very nice. Joe, followed by Jyoti. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of it's not to not criticize social institutions, it's to not do it carelessly. Mm-hmm. And that gets back to the idea of updating these institutions, but it's understanding why those institutions exist in the first place. So one of the lines that, stuck out to me in this past chapter was, striving to play fair in the ultimate sense, following the spirit of the rules as well as the letter. And in order to know when to deviate from the letter of the rules, you must understand the spirit of them, and that is when you can actually challenge not only yourself but institutions themselves. And I kind of think of that, even if you think about it in constitutional sense or things along those lines, any kind of institutions, when the spirit is not being met.
Joe, we have to keep it short for this one. This is lightning round. So let's do, okay. This particular rule of imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. What rule from 12 rules for life is this closest to?
I was going to say be precise in your speech.
Okay. Jean.
Well, I wasn't answer this question. I was answer the last question.
Go ahead. You can answer the last question.
Yeah.
Just keep it brief.
The last question, is I think you have to understand the rule to break it. So the real master, they have to understand, like the Picasso, he's good at painting, then he can break the rule.
Excellent. Thank you. Joe, followed by Roger.
Pursue what is meaningful.
Okay, very good. Roger.
I was going to say the same thing. Pursue what is meaningful. Essentially, that is what is meaningful to you is also what's, likely what you're going to be aiming at. So.
Wonderful. So then the next issue, I think you're absolutely right. Pursue what is meaningful and imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. What is it that this rule and the description add to pursue what is meaningful?
Why?
Anybody? What did you get in this chapter, which was new? Joe.
Essentially, in this chapter, it's more about engaging with your dragons and unknowns and chaos, I think, as opposed to pursuing what is meaningful, is actually more about it. That chapter in particular is about identifying what is meaningful. That would be the only distinction that I would make, although he covers it briefly in here as well.
Wonderful. Roger, followed by Jyoti. Roger.
Yeah, the idea of potential, I think it's really, really big for Peterson. He kind of sees it as like, that is the main question that we have, is how you should act, and action is how you manifest out of all possible realities, the one that actually does manifest itself and does come to existence. So we're kind of like writers of history in that sense. And I think this chapter really tries to really highlight that kind of blind God's idea of like, we have the ability to fully write and shape history without the ability to see what our choices fully end up doing. So I think that'd be the main difference.
Wonderful. For me. Jyoti, what difference do you see between pursue what is meaningful and this one?
This is about the discipline and transformation. They will help you to move forward.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Now, I like the way in which Maritza took on, the direction which Maritza took on of looking for like physical equivalent of the rule. So do you guys have any kind of, what shall I say, any kind of metaphors for describing anything in this rule? So dance was one of the things that Maritza talked about, but anything else?
I think music also works that way.
How so?
It has its own rules. At the same time, the idea of melody, it flows within the rules, but at the same time, it's really different and unique in its own way.
Very nice. Judith.
Maybe reading the script and then acting it out. Rule 1 is, were you comparing rule 1 and rule 2? Anyway, rule 1 is like the knowledge, the reading the script, and rule 2 is how you implement and act it out.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. And folks, feel free to go back to any of the questions that are raised. Okay, so Kevin.
It's about self-learning from known to unknown.
Wonderful. Wonderful. One more question. Okay, Maritza, go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick. I read an article once about somebody who wrote their own obituary. They wrote 2 of them. they wrote the first one from the perspective of who they could have been, like the most fantastical. And then the second one, following the path they were currently along with very little change. And it was interesting to see the disparity between the two.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to ask one more question, and then Victor, I'm going to ask you to share that image, and then we'll do some questions on the image. Okay, so next up is Brian. Brian, go ahead. Brian, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, the motion analogy, riding a bicycle. If you if you're not moving, you fall over. If you're going way too fast, you're out of control. Plus, you're always a little bit off balance when you ride a bicycle. You're constantly adjusting.
Wonderful, very nice, very nice. All right, so Victor, if you could share the image. Okay, is there a larger, is there a possibility of making it larger? Okay, so questions, any kind of comments about it? What did you guys think about this image? And why is it that this image is as powerful? Because he uses it very effectively in this chapter. Roger.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot. But,
no, Roger, go ahead. You always make amazing points. Please go ahead.
Well, no, I really like this, and when he was talking about it and describing it, I mean, obviously reminded me a lot of Jung, which is where he's pulling a lot of these ideas from, but also the idea from both alchemy and from Jung of wholeness, of this idea of full wholeness, and this idea that this image is supposed to represent the full potential of humanity, and it's kind of opposites all contained within one. So it's like this true idea of, and I think Victor had even noted that, the chaos, the chaos that's represented at the very bottom can also represent, our world. At the same time, the rebus is essentially standing on top of the dragon, which is the symbol of how we affectively interact with it. And at the same time, it's both masculine and feminine, and also the embodiment of the sun and the moon, and like a lot of like opposites combined within one single whole entity. And all of it is supposed to represent each human being's potential personality, essentially, or potential being, which Peterson lists it as like its potential personality, right? Like that's how it gets expressed. But yeah, I couldn't stop thinking about Jung the entire time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love diagrams like this. I think in terms of diagrams, and I think having all the things that you need to pay attention to in your visual focus, and you can just move your focus from one to other and start to explore relationship between them. It's almost you can write a whole essay as you kind of move your eye through it, and you can kind of explore the relationship. All the key things, key issues you can think about using just that image. So I find this extremely powerful. Next up is going to be Becky, Dave, and Kevin. Becky.
Very similar to what Roger was saying. It's preserving the integrity of the duality, but being able to move smoothly between the both, because they're combined in order to master the chaos.
Wonderful. Dave and then Kevin. Dave.
Yeah, the thing that first struck me about this was the two heads. And yes, they're masculine and feminine, but they're looking in opposite directions. And it reminds me of the Greek, believe it's a Greek god, Janus, looking forward in time and looking backward in time. And ergo, we name our first month January because look back in the last year and look forward. So I'm really surprised he didn't mention that image. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Kevin, Jade, and Victor. Kevin.
Yeah, I agree with Jody already mentioned it's on different level of the yin and yang. Also, it's oneness and wholeness. And also to have, how about think of bi-camera we talked about before. I got a question about this 4 star from left to 2 of inside the character and right to is have any meaning or what's that?
Sure. Well, let's not do questions for now. We can do that later on. Jade followed by Victor. Jade, what do you think of the image?
Am I still able to do any question or
Sure,
no?
sure. You can do any question. Go ahead.
So I kind of have imagery. Might not be the best, but in terms of dismantling, it's rugby, MMA, boxing. It's like people are getting pushed around, people are getting, you know, black eyes and all that stuff, but getting roughed up is the point. And someone might look at that if they don't know the rules, if they don't know the purpose and say, this is bad, this is wrong, people are getting hurt, but that's the point. Now, just because that's the point, does that mean that it's an okay thing? That's another thing, but it's just, I think that kind of displays that if you don't know what's going on, you're not qualified. It's very hard to switch things up and dismantle.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jade. Next up is Victor.
Well, the interesting thing is they stand on this round chaos that's on the bottom, and on the top, it's the symbol of Mercury. That represents the god of interest. And everything is between those two. And the numbers 3 and 4, according to Peterson and alchemic writings, 3 represents the idea of Trinitarian Trinity, and 4 represents the forms of reality, all 4 forms of reality. So it combines, it's the whole, the 3 and 4. So they are standing on that, and they are looking up to the idea of interest.
What are the 4 forms of reality?
Earth, fire, water.
Oh, those.
And,
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, wonderful. All right, you can stop sharing. You don't need to do that, but if you want to do that, you're welcome. I think overall things are working amazingly well, and I want to particularly thank the facilitators who put in a lot of work, and so that's what is there. So Claire, do you want to say something?
No.
No? Okay. All right. So and again, special thanks to Victor for the great slides. Really appreciate that, Victor. I think everybody loves it, and what it does is that it actually ends up reminding us of the entire chapter right there. It's a fantastic thing. All right. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you in a week.